Hi, Liz. I am doing my Unit 2 discussion today, and I picked the concept from the textbook of memory. And the reason why this is something that stuck out to me is that coming back to school in my late 30s is really quite difficult and challenging. And I'm having a difficult time remembering everything that I'm learning. And so I wanted to kind of research that a little bit more and find out maybe how this memory thing in our brain works and what I can do to make mine work a little bit better. So the model I chose is the Atkinson-Shriffrin model of memory. And you can find this beginning on page 256 in our textbook. And so I just wanted to kind of explain this a little bit to you. When we view things in the world and we have different experiences, we input that information. It's sensory input. But we have so much coming at us all the time, all throughout the day, that it's hard for us to hold on to every single piece of information. And so we tend to pick and choose. Our mind picks and chooses what is most important. And this is one thing that really interests me because I'm trying to, learn all these things in anatomy, and I need to pick what's the most important thing to remember. So what happens is this input comes in, sensory input comes in. So let's say you're in a grocery store and someone comes up and helps you. When you walk out of that grocery store, you might not really remember what that person was wearing because it's not super important, but you'll remember that they told you you could find salad dressing on aisle 2. So that input information comes in. It comes into our sensory memory, which is just really brief storage. We're talking like seconds. You're not going to hold on to this information for very long. It's coming in, it's really brief. It's kind of associated with the sights, the sounds, the tastes, maybe things that we're hearing. And what happens is our mind holds on to what it feels like is the most important information in this sensory memory. And whatever is not held onto is lost. You don't keep that. That's just kind of discarded. So it'd be like it's something you don't need to take up space in your brain remembering. And then once you have decided that it's important enough, and you're not losing it, it's going to come over here to the short-term memory. And this is also referred to as the working memory. You can hold on to about 7 different items in your short-term memory, and this lasts a lot longer than, it's still really brief, like 30 seconds, but it lasts longer than the sensory memory. So in your short-term memory, you have this that kind of can go over and over again called rehearsal, which is like you pull information from that short-term memory. Once you have held on to the short-term memory for that amount of time, we have to make room to be able to hold on to the next set of short-term memories. And so whatever you don't transfer over to your long-term memory is lost, just the same as your sensory memory. And when it transfers over here to your long-term memory is really cool because it has no limits. It can just hold tons and tons of information, but it's only holding the most important information, which is the information that you have passed on to it. It has 2 different types of memory, explicit and implicit. So explicit is like the kind I'm trying to make better in my mind. So how am I going to recall information for my anatomy test? Like I'm pulling it up from my mind. I have to go over it a lot and solidify it in there. And then that's when I'm taking that test, that's where that is coming from in the long-term memory, and the explicit is your recall. You also have something called implicit, which is like your memories that are formed from behaviors. So this is just, really kind of an important table to follow. And so I think one thing that I'm going to apply in my own life, learning from this model, is I really need to be paying close attention to what information is important and what information is not important. And that is something that I feel like once looking at study guides or talking to the professors or asking for their guidance on what's the most beneficial for me to study for this test will be really helpful in carrying what I'm learning from this sensory input into the sensory memory, into the short-term memory, and then again into the long-term memory, and specifically the explicit part of the long-term memory. One other thing that I thought was really interesting about this was in our sensory memory, there's something called within sensory memory, there was a study done by someone named J.R. Stroop, and he discovered this phenomenon in the 1930s. He said that you'll name a color more easily if it appears printed in that color And so this is called the Stroop effect. Well, my daughter Anna, she's recording for me. She's back behind the camera. She's my 13-year-old, and I are currently in a hotel tonight getting ready for her to go to a dance competition tomorrow. And so since I drove her all the way here for dance, I made her do this little experiment for me with these colors. And I told her, read it as fast as you can. I covered up the bottom. She read the top in 6.33 seconds. And then I covered up the top and had her read the bottom, and she read the bottom in 5.85 seconds. So clearly that proved that J.R. Stroop was correct, that when the color is listed or written, the word is written in the same color that it's talking about, that it was a quicker read for her, and our short-term memory was able to recall it more quickly, and to do it more quickly. So basically, I just kind of feel like one of the other important parts for me in putting it to use in my own life is going to be this rehearsal part. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. The step of rehearsal is repeating the information over and over and over again so it can be remembered. And it moves that short-term memory into long-term memory. It's also called memory consolidation. And so that's one thing I think I need to work on, is that rehearsal, or that repetition, just continuing to go over the same information over and over again so that I can really hold on to it and remember it. So I just think that the memory is really incredible, and I'm excited to kind of research it a little bit more, and I hope that from my chart and from my explanations that you learned a little bit more about it today. So thank you so much, and see you later.
Follow me on Instagram.